I remember freezing in the doorway, my keys still in my hand, trying to understand what I was looking at. There were boxes scattered across the living room floor, some open, some taped shut. My clothes, books, and framed photos were stacked like items in a moving sale. My mom was wrapping my desk lamp in newspaper, while my dad sealed a box with tape, like it was the most normal thing in the world. For a second, I thought maybe something had happened. Maybe they were renovating. Maybe there was a leak in my room. Maybe I was dreaming. But then my mom looked up, not surprised, not guilty, just annoyed that I was home earlier than expected. She didn't even pause what she was doing. My dad kept his eyes on the tape dispenser, like if he didn't look at me, I wouldn't exist. I asked what was going on, and my voice came out shaky even though I tried to hold it together. My mom answered like it was already decided, and there was no need for discussion. She said they were helping me transition, and that it was time for me to move into the studio. She said it so casually, like they were doing me a favor, like I should thank them for boxing up my life behind my back. I stood there waiting for someone to explain, to at least pretend they cared how this looked or how it felt. Instead, my dad just muttered something about timing and being grown up. He still wouldn't look at me. The house felt different in that moment, smaller, colder, like it wasn't mine anymore. I kept thinking about how just that morning I had left for work assuming everything was normal. I noticed they hadn't packed everything, just my things. Not a single box of theirs, not a shared item, nothing from the rest of the house. Only my belongings were being removed like clutter they were tired of looking at. My shoes were lined up by the door in a trash bag. My bedding was stuffed into a box labeled with my name in my mother's handwriting. I wanted to ask why they hadn't told me, why they thought this was okay, but the silence in the room told me the answer. They didn't think they owed me a warning. I felt embarrassed for even expecting one. I swallowed whatever argument was forming in my throat, because I knew it wouldn't matter. They had already made the decision and acted on it without me. I walked past them and into my room, what used to be my room. The closet doors were open and half-empty hangers were on the floor. The drawers were pulled out, contents gone. The bed was stripped. I didn't cry, but there was a knot in my chest that made it hard to breathe. It hit me that this wasn't just about moving. It was about being pushed out of a place I still thought of as home. I didn't yell or beg. I just stood there, trying to accept that my life had been packed into boxes without my knowledge. And in that moment, I realized something I didn't want to face. Maybe I had never really belonged there the way I believed I did. My mom said it like she was reminding me of something I had already agreed to. Her tone was calm, almost bored, like this was just another chore on her list. I kept standing there, waiting for someone to explain how any of this made sense. My dad stepped around a box and walked into the kitchen without saying a word. He didn't even glance at me. It felt like I had walked into a conversation they'd already finished without me. I asked what she meant by studio, and she said they had rented a place across town. She mentioned it like it was some kind of gift, like I should be thanking them. I didn't even know they were looking for a place. She never asked if I wanted to move, if I could afford it, or if I was ready. It wasn't a question, it was an announcement. I asked when they decided this, and she said it had been in the works for a while. That hurt more than the words themselves. It meant they had talked about me, planned around me, and taken action without including me even once. They had filled out paperwork, signed a lease, and probably visited the place without me knowing anything. I could tell they thought they were doing something reasonable. My mom said it would motivate me and help me grow up. She didn't look at my face when she said it. My dad came back from the kitchen with a roll of tape and asked me to move so he could reach another box. He said it like I was in his way. I tried to keep my voice steady and asked why they didn't tell me sooner. My mom shrugged and said I would have overreacted. That made it clear they knew I wouldn't agree, so they skipped the part where I had a choice. It wasn't a conversation. They didn't want one. The room felt heavy. They didn't ask how I felt or where I would put my things or how I planned to handle rent, bills, or transportation. It wasn't about helping me. It was about removing me. My mom even mentioned they had already given notice at the rental office that I'd move in that week. She said I had 2 days to get the rest of my stuff together. The way they behaved made me feel like a guest who had stayed too long. My dad finally spoke more than a word and said, "This is for your own good." He said it without emotion, like a line he'd rehearsed. I didn't respond. There was no point arguing with people who had already decided everything. They didn't pause to ask what I thought. They didn't ask if I could manage the cost. They didn't ask if I was okay. They assumed I would go along with it because they had already done the work to make it happen. That was the part that made it feel less like a push and more like a dismissal. They weren't preparing me. They were removing me. I stood there long enough for the silence to become uncomfortable, but neither of them broke it. My mom went back to wrapping dishes that belonged to me. My dad taped another box closed. They acted like the conversation was over before it even began. And that's when I understood exactly where I stood in their lives. useful when needed, but disposable when inconvenient. When I finally saw the place they picked for me, I understood everything. It wasn't an apartment in any real sense. It was an old garage someone had turned into a room by adding a thin door and a small sink that barely worked. The walls were uneven, the floor was cracked in places, and the only window was the size of a shoebox and didn't open properly. It smelled like dust and old paint the moment I stepped in. There was one outlet on the wall and a light bulb hanging from the ceiling with no cover. The so-called kitchenette was just a counter with a hot plate sitting on top. The sink dripped constantly, and the faucet turned sideways when you touched it. There was no real space for my things, just a narrow strip along one wall where a twin mattress had been pushed. They called it temporary housing, like that made it acceptable. The bathroom wasn't even inside. It was in another part of the building and used by two other tenants I'd never met. The door didn't lock properly, and the tiles were chipped. There was one small mirror above a rusty sink and a shower that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in weeks. I remember standing there staring at it, realizing this was the place my parents thought was good enough. When I told them it wasn't safe or livable, they brushed it off. My mom said it was a start and that I shouldn't expect comfort right away. My dad said people my age should learn to be grateful and stop acting entitled. They acted like they had done something generous. They never once asked if I liked it or if I felt safe there. They said I had been taking too long to figure out adulthood. According to them, I was stuck and they were just giving me a push. The part that stayed in my head was when my mom said they needed the house to themselves now. She didn't say it with guilt or hesitation. She said it like she was finally getting rid of a problem. I stood in the middle of that garage room and tried to picture myself living there. I imagined waking up in the cold because there was no proper heating. I imagined walking outside in the dark just to use the bathroom. I thought about my things sitting in boxes against a wall that looked like it could crumble. I didn't cry, but something sank inside me. The place didn't feel like a step forward. It felt like being pushed into a corner and told to survive quietly. I asked if they had even looked at other options, and my dad said this was the cheapest and all I needed. The way he said it made it clear this wasn't about helping me move forward. It was about getting me out fast. They didn't stay long when they drove me there to see it. My mom pointed out the small heater in the corner that barely worked and acted like that solved everything. My dad handed me a copy of the lease and said the rent was already paid for the first month, so I had time to adjust. After that, they expected me to handle it alone. When they left, I stood outside and looked at the building again. It was behind another house, hidden away like something people didn't want to see. That was how it felt. They wanted me gone, but not far enough to seem cruel. Just distant enough to forget about me. When I think about everything I did for them, that studio felt like the final slap in the face. I didn't grow up careless or sheltered. I was working before most of my friends even thought about jobs. When I was 16, my parents' small printing business started falling apart. They said they just needed some help until things picked up again. So I got a part-time job after school and handed most of my paychecks to them. I didn't complain. I thought I was doing what a good daughter should do. While my friends planned trips or saved for college things, I spent weekends helping at the shop. I answered calls, cleaned the place, and ran errands. I missed out on parties, school events, and breaks because they said family came first. When I graduated high school, I had a small college fund from my grandparents. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough to cover community college without loans. My parents knew about it. Then one afternoon, they sat me down looking stressed and told me the business was close to shutting down. They had fallen behind on payments, and they said if the business closed, we could lose the house too. They didn't ask directly. They talked around it like the decision was already made. I offered the money because I felt trapped between guilt and duty. They promised, in clear words, that it was temporary. They said once things recovered, they would pay me back and help me go to college properly. I believed them. I signed the papers and handed over everything. That money was gone in less than a week, paying off overdue bills and suppliers. I didn't complain when college got pushed back. I kept working. I watched them buy new equipment for the shop instead of paying me back, even a little. They always said, "When things settle, we'll take care of you." Years passed and nothing changed. I worked different jobs and still helped them at the shop whenever they needed. Anytime I brought up school or money, they said it wasn't the right time. They always had a reason: taxes, bills, upgrades, emergencies. I told myself they would make things right eventually. I didn't realize I was the backup plan they never intended to let go of. When I finally tried to take night classes at the community college, I paid out of pocket. No one offered to help. They acted like I was being dramatic for expecting anything. They even told relatives they had given up their savings to support my future, which was the opposite of what actually happened. I kept quiet because arguing would only make me look ungrateful. Looking back, I can see how normal it became for them to rely on me. Anytime something went wrong, I stepped in. Anytime they needed money, I found a way. I didn't see it as being used then. I thought it was loyalty. I assumed they loved me the same way I loved them, but their actions said otherwise. By the time they packed my things and told me to move, it hit me how one-sided everything had been. They remembered every bill I could help them with, but forgot every promise they made when I needed something in return. I didn't learn the real reason from them at first. They kept talking about independence and timing, acting like they were doing what was best for me. But the truth slipped out when my mom left a folder on the kitchen table while they were still packing my things. It was full of sketches, receipts, and notes about converting the room. My room was labeled gym/storage in my dad's handwriting. The guest room was marked for my mom's crafts. There was no mention of me anywhere. I stood there staring at the papers while they kept working like nothing was wrong. They hadn't picked that studio because they thought it would help me grow or learn responsibility. They picked it because they wanted more space for themselves. They wanted their hobbies and comfort, and I was just in the way. I didn't say anything when I realized. I just felt something sink inside me. I thought about all the years my room stayed untouched because they said it was my space and my comfort. When I was a kid, they used to tell me I'd always have a place there. But now they were planning which wall the treadmill would go against and where the storage bins would sit. My mom walked in while I was looking at the papers. She didn't even seem bothered that I saw them. She just said, "We've waited long enough to use the space." That was it. No apology, no pause, no shame. It was like she expected me to understand right away and accept it without question. I went back to my room and closed the door, even though half of it was already packed up. The walls were bare where my posters used to hang. The shelves were empty. The bed had no sheets. I remember picking up the last few things, a stack of notebooks, a charger, a photo frame I didn't even want to look at. I moved slowly, not because I needed time, but because I didn't know how to act around them anymore. My dad came in once to grab an empty box, and he wouldn't look at me. He just said, "Make sure you don't leave anything behind." He said it in the same tone he used when he reminded me to take out the trash growing up. I nodded, even though my throat felt tight. I didn't argue. I didn't cry in front of them. There was no point. Their minds were made up long before I even knew what was happening. I could have yelled or begged, but it wouldn't change a thing. They weren't doing this out of anger. They were doing it because they genuinely saw nothing wrong with pushing me out for extra space. When I put the last box by the door, I felt this heavy silence settle over me. Not the kind that waits for words, just the kind that tells you nothing else needs to be said. I kept my eyes down and held myself together long enough to get everything into my car. I didn't let the tears fall until I was alone with the door shut. Even then, I tried to keep quiet because admitting how much it hurt felt like giving them more power than they already took. Moving into that studio didn't break me, even though it easily could have. The first few nights were the hardest. The walls were thin, the air was cold, and every sound from the shared bathroom made me feel like I was living in a place not meant for people. I slept with my shoes next to the bed because I didn't trust the lock on the door. Still, I got up every morning and went to work like nothing was wrong. I picked up extra shifts and stayed late whenever I could. I cut back on everything: food, rides, clothes, anything that wasn't necessary. I stopped eating out completely and made cheap meals in that tiny sink area. I kept my boxes stacked against the wall because I didn't bother unpacking. I knew I wouldn't stay there for long. After a few weeks, I called Nina Brooks, someone I hadn't spoken to much since high school. We were close once, but life pulled us in different directions. I didn't give her every detail, just said I needed a place to stay for a little while. She didn't ask questions or make me explain. She cleared space on her couch and told me to come over with whatever I needed. Sleeping at Nina's place felt like breathing again. It wasn't fancy, but it was safe and warm. She made me coffee in the mornings and never made me feel like a burden. I still paid rent for the studio until the month ended, but I stopped going back except to grab the rest of my things. I left the key on the counter and didn't look back. During that time, I focused on getting ahead. I talked to my manager about taking on more tasks and told them I was ready to move up if a spot opened. I didn't beg or brag, I just did the work. I showed up early, stayed late, and didn't turn down anything they asked. People noticed. A few months passed, and a position opened in another department. It came with better pay and more hours. I applied and got it without any hesitation from the supervisors. That promotion changed everything. With the extra income, I started searching for a real place to live, somewhere clean, safe, and mine. I found a small apartment downtown with one bedroom, a working heater, and a door that locked properly. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like a step forward. The first night I slept there, I lay down on my mattress on the floor and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: relief. Nobody pushed me into it. Nobody controlled it. I earned it. I didn't tell my parents where I moved or how I was doing. They didn't ask, and I didn't offer. I stopped waiting for apologies or explanations. I stopped hoping they'd understand what they did. My life moved forward without their approval or involvement. Every paycheck I saved felt like taking back a piece of what I lost. Every quiet night in that new place reminded me that I could stand on my own without anyone pretending it was a favor. I didn't need their house, their space, or their permission anymore. I hadn't heard from them in months when the first message came. It was a short text from my mom saying she hoped I was doing well and that they missed me. There was no apology, no mention of what they had done, just a sudden kindness that felt forced. A day later, my dad called and left a voicemail saying they would love to have me over for dinner sometime. They had never used that tone with me before, not even when I still lived with them. I didn't respond right away. Something told me this wasn't about missing me at all. A week later, I heard from a family friend who still lived near them. She said the business was falling apart again. Orders had dropped, bills were backing up, and the bank refused to extend their loan. The house, the one they pushed me out of to have space, was now at risk because they couldn't make payments on time. It didn't surprise me. I had seen this happen once before, and back then I stepped in and gave up everything I had. This time, I was just watching it from the outside. They didn't know that I already knew how bad things were. I kept quiet and waited to see how long it would take before they admitted it. A few days after the first messages, my mom called again. She sounded cheerful in a way that didn't match reality. She asked how my job was going and said she hoped I could stop by the house soon. She mentioned she had made my favorite dish and wanted to catch up. She never talked like that when things were going well for them. I listened to her speak like nothing had ever happened, like they hadn't forced me out so they could turn my room into a gym. She didn't ask how I was living, didn't ask where I stayed, didn't mention the studio, didn't bring up the past. She just talked as if we were on good terms. I didn't say yes or no. I told her I was busy and would let her know. She didn't push, but I could hear the stress in her voice beneath the fake warmth. Not long after, my dad tried calling again. He asked if I could stop by on Sunday because they had something to discuss. He didn't say what, but I knew. They thought that if they acted gentle, I'd forget everything and walk back and ready to help just like before. They didn't know who I had become in those months. They still saw me as the person who would give without asking questions. I didn't refuse them outright. I stayed calm, answered short, and didn't offer anything. I could feel them trying to ease me into a conversation where money would come up naturally. They wouldn't say it immediately. They'd try to make it seem like I owed them a visit first. The difference this time was simple. I had nothing left to give them. Not my savings, not my space, not my trust. Let them ask. Let them pretend. I already knew why they wanted me back around, and it had nothing to do with love or family. I agreed to visit them, but only to see things for myself. When I walked into the house, it didn't even feel familiar anymore. The hallway looked the same, but everything past it felt different. I went to my old room out of habit, and the sight of it made my chest tighten. The bed was gone. The shelves were gone. The walls were painted a different color. A treadmill stood where my desk used to be, and weights were stacked in the corner. My mom had a whole table covered in fabric, glue guns, and storage bins where my dresser once stood. It didn't even look like a bedroom anymore, just space they had claimed without hesitation. They acted like nothing was wrong. My mom said she was happy I came and asked if I wanted coffee. My dad told me to sit in the living room like we were about to have a normal talk. I sat across from them, not comfortable but calm. They tried small talk first, asked about my job, my apartment, my schedule. It was obvious they didn't care about the answers. They were circling around what they really wanted. It didn't take long. My dad leaned forward and said they'd hit a rough patch again and needed temporary help. He didn't say the word money right away, but I heard it in every pause. My mom followed up by asking if I still had those savings I mentioned months ago. She said it the same way someone might ask about an umbrella they once loaned out. Casual, expectant. They talked like it was normal for them to ask, like helping them before meant I should keep helping whenever they snapped their fingers. My dad reminded me how family supports each other, and how I had always come through when it mattered. He said it like praise, but it felt like a trap. My mom added that I was doing well now, and that I should step up like last time. I didn't interrupt. I let them talk, list their problems, and pretend it was reasonable. They mentioned the loan denial, the late payments, and how the business couldn't survive without an injection. They made it sound like an investment, but I knew better. Last time, my college fund disappeared in days and was never spoken of again. My dad finally asked directly if I could offer what I had. He acted like it was a simple request, not a repeat of everything they had taken before. My mom didn't look guilty for even a second. She just waited for me to agree, like she was sure I would. I felt my stomach twist, not from shock, but from the way they expected it without hesitation. They didn't apologize for the studio, the boxes, or the lies. They didn't mention what they did to me at all. They just wanted the part of me that was useful. Nothing else. I sat back, looked at both of them, and didn't rush to answer. For the first time, the silence belonged to me, not them. I didn't raise my voice or try to argue. I just told them exactly what they had done. I reminded them how I worked through my teenage years to keep their business alive, how I handed over my college fund without a fight, and how they promised to pay me back but never tried. I told them I remembered every time they said it was only temporary, and how nothing ever came back to me. Not the money, not the support, not even respect. Then I brought up the studio. I told them I hadn't forgotten how they packed my belongings without warning, signed a lease behind my back, and pushed me into a place that wasn't even safe to live in. I reminded them that they didn't speak to me like a daughter when they did that. They treated me like an inconvenience they finally got rid of. My dad didn't like hearing any of it. He tried to twist it around and make it sound like they had been helping me all along. He said I misunderstood their intentions and that I was being ungrateful. He claimed they taught me independence and that I should thank them for it. He tried to make it sound like I owed them because they raised me. My mom started crying, but not the kind of crying that comes from guilt. It was the kind that appears when things don't go their way. She said I was being cold and unfair, that I was turning my back on them in their time of need. She brought up memories from childhood, as if that erased everything they did when I was older. I didn't let their reactions change my decision. I didn't apologize. I didn't comfort them. I didn't argue back and forth. I just told them the simple truth. I wasn't giving them anything. Not money, not time, not another chance to drain me. I said I had already paid more than enough for their mistakes, and that I was done being their emergency fund. My dad told me I was making a mistake I'd regret. He said family doesn't abandon each other, and one day I would come crawling back for forgiveness. I didn't respond to that. My mom kept asking how I could do this when they were struggling, but I remembered how easily they left me alone when I was the one struggling. I stood up, told them I hoped they figured out their problems without me, and walked to the door. My mom called after me, still crying, and my dad said something under his breath, but I didn't look back. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel unsure. I just felt done. For the first time, I chose myself over them. I didn't stay to explain further. I didn't wait for them to calm down. I left their house, the same one I helped protect all those years, and closed the door behind me without hesitation. Walking away didn't feel cruel. It felt overdue. A few months passed, and I focused only on my own life. I kept working hard, managed my money carefully, and stayed consistent with my goals. I didn't ask my parents for anything, and I didn't tell them what I was doing. I kept my distance and built my life quietly. Eventually, I was able to buy a small townhouse. It wasn't huge or fancy, but it was mine. No one could tell me to leave, no one could take it from me, and no one could claim credit for it. I signed the papers on my own, furnished it the way I wanted, and felt a kind of peace I never had before. During that time, I heard from a relative that things at my parents' house were falling apart. Their loan troubles had finally caught up with. The business that I once helped save was failing again, and there was no one left to bail them out. Their mortgage went unpaid long enough that the bank took action. The house I helped keep afloat when I was younger was slipping out of their hands, and this time, there was no money of mine to rescue anything. They lost the house and had to move into a small rental. It wasn't near the nice area they were used to, and it didn't have room for all of the things they once filled their lives with. The personal gym and craft room they threw me out for were gone. They didn't call to tell me any of this directly. They didn't apologize. They didn't ask how I was doing. They only reached out once through a short message, trying to hint that they were going through a rough time. I didn't offer help, money, or advice. I read it and moved on. I didn't feel happy about their situation, but I didn't feel responsible for it either. There was no sense of revenge in me. I wasn't waiting for them to fall. I just finally understood that saving them would only destroy me again. They made their choices, and I made mine. The difference was that I finally chose myself. Living in my townhouse, I realized how much weight I had been carrying for years without noticing. The silence in my own space felt different than the silence in that studio. It wasn't loneliness, it was freedom. I could rest without worrying someone would blame me for something. I could make plans without wondering who would ruin them. I could finally breathe without feeling guilty. I didn't become bitter. I became stronger. I didn't sit around waiting for them to change. I changed the direction of my own life. I stopped trying to be the person who fixed everything for everyone else and became someone who protected her own future. Their betrayal didn't crush me the way they thought it would. It forced me to grow away from them and build something they couldn't touch or control. I didn't get revenge. I got distance, and that was more powerful than anything I could have given them.